This week, I've got Pinocchio, which is the live action, and I put that in air quotes, remake of the Disney version of the story of Pinocchio. And this might set a record for the shortest review ever, in which I'm just going to say don't. Just don't. Absolutely not. Don't do it. I found zero redeeming things about this film, and I will fully acknowledge I'm not a huge fan of the original Disney animated movie, which is how I was introduced to the story of Pinocchio. This is also not the only Pinocchio story we're going to get this year. We're also getting a Guillermo del Toro stop-motion animated version on Netflix, but I am not a huge fan of the story of Pinocchio, so I will acknowledge a bias going in there. But I found this version honestly frightening, and not in a good way. I think one of the things about the original animated film, or the animated Disney film of it, I'm just gonna call it the original, you know what I mean, about the original version of it, is that it is a little bit darker than maybe some of the other, I mean, some of the early Disney animated stuff is dark, but this one was probably scarier for children, which I didn't register or whatever. I just didn't understand the story. I mean, I guess I understand the story and that he wanted to be a real boy, but I find it to be one of the more convoluted ones. I understand that people have an affection for it. More power to you. So this version, Tom Hanks plays Geppetto, and from the get-go, I'm just like, absolutely not. Actually, I'm sorry. From the get-go, this movie opens with a nightmare of a character design of Jiminy Cricket, who's voiced by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, doing this weird kind of southern, like voice-cracking, pubescent version, and I could not understand any of the choices there. But really, the visual design of it is so unappealing. And I get it that it's a bug, but there are ways to make it appeal. Look at Hopper from A Bug's Life. He's a villain. It's supposed to be scary, and he is better looking and more appealing than this version of Jiminy Cricket. So we start off with that. That's our introduction to the movie. And from there, it's honestly just downhill. I want to know who approved that character design, but it gets worse. So then we're introduced to Tom Hanks as Geppetto, and yes, visually, they made him look like the cartoon version of Geppetto. Congratulations. I generally like Tom Hanks. I have not been a huge fan of his performances the last few years because he just is kind of Tom Hanks. And, you know, no fault to him. Some of it's just the choices he makes. Some of it I'm sure he's being asked to do. But here's the problem with Tom Hanks in this role. Yes, you can slap a wig on him and make him look like Geppetto, but it opens, I don't care if this is a spoilerish, but it opens with him singing, mumbling a song to himself. Tom Hanks can't sing, and it just feels wrong. It just feels wrong, and I'm like, why did you cast him for this? Also, he's maybe doing like a quarter of an Italian accent, but everybody else in the movie is doing like a heavy Italian accent. So we know Tom Hanks can act. Can he do an accent? Separate issue. Well, maybe not. I think we know Tom Hanks can't do an accent. So why cast him if a core component of this is it being set in an Italian village? And then we get to Pinocchio himself. And I thought it broke my brain. It absolutely broke my brain because the CG on this is so atrocious because it looks like the design of the animated film. But the rest of the world is very, not very, but it's physical. There's sets, there's textures, there's all these things. And then Pinocchio just stands out like a sore thumb because he's just creepily smooth and like the texturing, the lighting is all off, and his eyes freak me out so much. They're like painted on eyes instead of being, a wooden puppet eyes, which theoretically, there's a world in which the puppet eyes could blink or have eyelids or whatever it is, but it's just, they're flat and painted onto his head, and it's so unnerving. And I am begging Robert Zemeckis, who directed and wrote this version of it, to stop doing CG-heavy films. I'm begging him. He has had some amazing movies in his lifetime. He directed Back to the Future, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which shows he is capable of working with animation. Forrest Gump, Castaway, Romancing the Stone. So it's like he's got all these things on his resume that you're like, yeah, great. And then he's got all these other things where you're like, please, why? Why have you done this? And we start with Beowulf, and then we go to A Christmas Carol. And then there is, of course, the most horrifying film of all time when it comes to CG, and that is The Polar Express. So, Mr. Zemeckis, I'm begging you, stop doing films that rely on CG protagonists. It's not working. It's not working. I don't know. Technology has improved since all those times, and yet there's something about when you are involved in it, it's just horrifying. So I found myself very zoned out by a little bit in. I think it was my brain's way of protecting itself from the damage that was being done by watching this. I will give a couple of very brief, I guess, relative shout outs. So Cynthia Erivo plays the Blue Fairy. she's fine in it. You know, I think they've overhyped her role in it. She sings When You Wish Upon a Star. It's fine. I think prefer the original version only because it's just stuck in my head, but you know, no shade to her version of it. And then Keegan-Michael Key voices Honest John, who's another CG character, and he's in like a completely different movie in terms of energy than everyone else is, and I give him credit for that. Like, he was clearly trying his damnedest. But there's no saving this movie. I will say, the kid who voices Pinocchio does a fine job. His name's Benjamin Evan Ainsworth. And, you know, it's not his fault that his puppet is going to give me nightmares. Then you've got all these other really weird additions. You've got Lorraine Bracco as a seagull. I don't remember if that's in the original. Luke Evans has this whole sequence as, like, the coachman, which is, there's so much money that goes into these films. And this doesn't give me anything that improves upon or adjusts the original or has a different perspective on it. There's no reason to remake this aside from a cash grab, but it's also not even necessarily a cash grab because it's a Disney Plus play. And you could be investing your money in new original stories, and even if they didn't work out, at least you'd be trying to do something different and contribute to art or whatever it is, aside from this churn factory of just these remakes that I don't understand the reasoning for. It breaks my heart. So I am going to give this, and I acknowledge that lots of people work on films. It's hard business. You know, I don't blame any of the animators. I slightly blame the character designers. But at the end of the day, like, Robert Zemeckis is the one who's like, that's what I want it to look like. So even it's not their fault. This is a rare, and I'm sorry to say this, it's a 0 out of 5 to me because it does absolutely nothing to add to conversation, to change its perspective from the original, as everything I just said. And if you're going to do that, like, what's the point? Just watch the animated film. Or, again, we'll see what happens when Guillermo del Toro comes out. But I'm very sorry to say a 0 out of 5 for the 2022 Disney remake of Pinocchio.